Hey everybody, good afternoon. Thank you, Mike, for the kind of introduction and putting on this awesome event with all the help and support of the community. We'll just go ahead and get started because it's time to have some fun. So, title of this talk is Making Sense of Splunk Enterprise. Again, my name is Jonathan Singer, and I'm a Splunk practice lead in the Southeast region at Guidepoint Security. So a little bit about our agenda for today. We'll talk about who am I, right? Why do I deserve to talk about this stuff and what's my background? We'll talk about the history of logging. I'm a big fan of building a foundation and understanding, right, where the current technologies that we're using today, what's the history behind it? Where'd they come from? Why is it the way we're doing things? We'll talk about what is Splunk, right? I mean, it could be a lot of things. We'll find out. Who uses Splunk, I think, is also really important because oftentimes you may look at other case studies or companies that are using a product and you want to know what it's doing for them and how they're applying this set of technology. And then my fun facts on how to get the most out of Splunk. I've been doing this for a while. I've learned quite a bit about some of the what to do, what not to do, and how to make the most of the tool. And then I want to remind everybody that, getting into this stuff, it's free. I don't work for Splunk. I work for Guidepoint, but this is what I enjoy. This is what I talk about. And then finally, I'll actually talk about what I do at Guidepoint Security, just to kind of round it off, if that sounds good. So who am I? I already talked about my Splunk practice lead down here in the Southeast. We're a cybersecurity company. Say hi. We're hanging out. I'm in the chat. Thanks for the comment on the cool background. It's just hacker stuff. Prior to working with Guidepoint and doing all this stuff, and even this one stuff, I worked in data centers, Red Hat, web application security, IR. But I spent a lot of my time reading logs with grep. And that taught me a lot about how I appreciate Splunk and similar SIM tools today. I've got a bunch of letters, GCIA, GPEN, blah, blah, blah. We love letters, right? I do have a master's in cybersecurity. I'm a big advocate for punishment in higher education. And then finally, some fun facts, right? I lead the local OWASP chapter here. I co-founded BSides Orlando 8 years ago. And I love talking at conferences. So, just adding this one to the list. And then I'm a badge maker. That's one of my hobbies. I make badges at DEF CON. I make badges for BSides conferences, all kinds of fun stuff like that. In fact, I'm a goon at DEF CON. So if anybody ever sees me roaming the halls with a red shirt yelling at you, it's out of love, I promise. So let's talk a little bit about the history of logging, right? Like I said, I love history. Fun fact, the syslog protocol, it was originally designed in the 80s, and it was put together by the Sendmail team. And if anybody's familiar, old school Linux, Sendmail is just this classic application for email transmission and stuff like that. And so the Sendmail team wanted to log their application, and so they put together the initial standards for the syslog protocol. And a lot of developers and stuff back in the day, it was a very tight-knit, community developing all these applications for the Linux environment and Unix and things like that. And so other applications at the time started to adopt this published standard that Sendmail was kind of putting out there. And they said, hey, look, this is how we're kind of doing things. And other people said, oh, it's very clever. We're going to just do it the same way you're doing it, right? Let's use a little source code. Sounds great. And from that point, it started to kind of grow, and it kind of just became the standard for any kind of Unix, Linux logging, right? If your application was generating log data, it was from this syslog protocol, put out by the Sendmail team. In fact, it was just assumed for a long time that this was a big publicized, well-documented standard, but surprisingly, for several decades, the syslog protocol was being used, being added to different applications, and it wasn't even until 2001 that it finally made it into the RFC, and that's when it was just even initially documented. It was actually standardized in 2009, and when you kind of look back and put things in perspective, that's almost 3 decades of using a protocol before it was actually like, hey, I think we have something here. There seems to be a lot of traction with it. So it's actually quite impressive of how long these things existed prior to it becoming, published and documented as something that, people will, want to apply a fixed standard to. So again, if you want to read RFPs, totally cool with me. I just, there's a couple good ones out there. It's a lot of documentation, if you ask me. So one of the cool things, though, that I did find while pilfering my history story on RFPs is that they decided, what, syslog can relay in a lot of different ways. And what's interesting here is that these different architectural models to allow data transmit from the generation of the log data or application to where it was ultimately being collected for review, they wanted to be able to be flexible with that, right? In fact, if you look at this wonderful archaic ASCII display here, it kind of looks familiar, especially if you're already familiar with any kind of SIM or logging tool. The concept of generating it at one place and then relaying it through another system or application, whether that's multiple times or even splitting the data, this has been well understood and well contrived for quite a while here. And so in my opinion, this is the basis of how almost all modern logging and SIM technologies are built today. And this is from 2 decades ago published, even prior, older than that. And so this technology, doesn't even look like it's changed much from when it was originally designed and architected. But it's kind of fun to see where a lot of these tools today came from. And that put together that concept of centralized logging, right? Like, why do we do this in the first place? Well, we collect these logs from all these different systems and applications, and we put them in one place. Like, okay, so you put all my logs in one place. Now what, right? Well, you can store them for long term, right? Oftentimes, space was very scarce on systems back in the day, and it's not like the log itself has really changed much. It's a string, right? But a 1 gigabyte hard drive back in the day was kind of a big deal versus we're today laughing at a 1 terabyte. And so offloading them and putting in a central place allowed you to actually save a lot of space on that host or system generating the data. And then from there, it just kind of adds benefits, really. If something happened, you had to log into every single box. And imagine if you're in a data center, we used to call them crash cards. We had to run the monitor up and plug into every single system just to look at the data. So you can review it all from one centralized place. Doesn't matter where it comes from. And you can search for values across multiple systems very quickly. For instance, you can look for an IP address and find out how many different systems that IP was found in the logs. So very cool stuff, in my opinion, from back in the day. So let's talk about the whole shining star, I guess, what we're talking today, right? What is Splunk? So we have Splunk here at the top, and it's an architecture of different moving components, right? You have your searching capabilities, which is going to be like that magnifying glass layer, right? So the people use the search console to look at the data and to architect these searches in this SPL language. And then we have what's called the indexing tier. And that's where these little green database looking symbols are. And that's where your data is stored. So it comes into Splunk and it gets parsed. And that data is then indexed and brought in. And it's not like a database per se. It's a little bit different. There's some fun algorithms around it, and there's different types of searching algorithms. They call them blooms and things like that. But the idea is that the data is stored so that it's quickly searchable based off of all kinds of different keywords. And then finally, that third one in the gray area with the little Tux penguins there, that's what we call the forwarding tier, right? Ultimately, where that data is sourcing from. So in that order, right, we source the data, we send it to our indexers, and then those indexers are searched by our searching consoles, right? And then that data that we're forwarding, that we're bringing in, can come from like all over the place. We're talking all your different systems and your applications and your databases and your virtualization and your firewalls, right? I mean, really, it comes from the vast variety across your organization. Just to name a few places, there's a lot of big names out there, and they've all, looked to Splunk and other SIMs too, to get familiar with their logs and their log types and be able to send that data. So you have to look at these SIM tools as something that has to kind of have arms into every aspect of your enterprise. If you're not collecting data from everywhere, you can't paint the full picture, right? These people today are just much more clever as far as a business could have different ways of being compromised, whether it's your website or directly into your network at a firewall or some kind of API with a partner or insider threat, right? Or your endpoints and somebody's checking email, clicking the wrong link. There's many different ways and attack vectors in an organization. And so just being even able to collect all that data and make sense of it is what that big goal, that bigger picture is trying to achieve. All right, enough of that. Talk tech, right? What is a log anyways, right? Like, why is this important? Why do we care? And how does Splunk actually make use or make sense of this data? And so we call it machine data in the vernacular of Splunk. But let's just throw this example out here, right? And so we have a log, and there's quite a few fields. And back in the day, I mentioned I used to use grep. Grep is a very simple to use, regular expression-based searching tool. Either something is there, it doesn't, and it shows you where it is. Again, there's a lot of other things to it, but you get the idea. But what Splunk does is when it looks at this log, there's a lot. And so these green highlighted fields are actually Splunk parsing out the data. And what we've done is we've parsed a date and a time. But we've also been able to parse out, bytes and command and department, right? And customer name and result and PID and process. And so there's a lot of rich fields, right? And key value pairs in these logs that we can parse out with Splunk, and suddenly all of these variables become individually searchable. So then instead of saying, I just want to generalize across my logs, it's I want to find logs where the SSHD process, right, was identified or was a key value pair. So suddenly we're becoming more granular and more specific on our searches and pivoting off of specific variables or key values rather than a larger string. And just like that, we went from making our haystack a little bit smaller, which it's always going to be a haystack somehow or some way. But if you can shrink the size of that haystack, you will find that needle quicker and more effectively, right? The worst would be a needle in a needle stack, but that's a story for another day. So along with those fields that are broken out from a Splunk, from a log when it enters Splunk, Splunk also takes a moment and tags some what I call metadata on top of it, right? And so every log has to have these three fields. The first one is host. Where did this log come from? That's either the host name resolved by DNS or an IP address. So even if an application on a system generates a log, that host still had to be a computer sending that log to Splunk. It's somewhere down the chain. So where did this system, what system did this come from? Now source helps define where the log originated on that system. So a source could be a particular path to a file. So if we're reading like a log file, that's where source is. So now we know what system it came from and what file on that system this came from. And then finally, we have something called source type, which is what's the data structure of it. So I know what system it came from. I know what file on the system it came from, but do I know what type of data this is? Now, that's very helpful because classification and identification of data is going to help you quickly parse out what all those fields are. There's characteristics to each type of log. And then that furthermore is going to allow you to maybe isolate, all right, I only want to see the logs from my Palo Alto firewalls. I only want to see the logs, from my Checkmarx application security review. So you get the opportunity to focus on a specific type of data because you may have multiple types and multiple sources from a single host. So, what do I mean by logs look different? No, like really, logs look different. I have an example of three different vendors here. A FortiGate, right? That's a firewall for some people. And this FortiGate calls it source IP or SRC IP. But Palo doesn't even give it a variable, something equals term. It just throws it in the log. So I need to know that position in the log, that comma delimited position, that field is a source. And that's where that source type definition comes in, is being able to say, okay, this log, it looks like this, and this is where the data exists. In this log, it looks like this, and this is where this data is. And then finally, something like Apache, it just throws the IP right up front. And so each one, it's defined a little bit differently. So Splunk is going to kind of build a commonality across different source types using this common information model, and building these like aliases or comparisons. So a source IP in one log is going to look different than in a different log, but that doesn't mean that that we can't determine that they're both the same purpose. And that way we can actually search for one single value for a source IP specifically, not the destination IP or anything else, across different types of logs. So suddenly we are now operating more efficiently, right? In our searches, we're shrinking that haystack, and we're actually getting results quicker. Super cool stuff, right? So that's how. So how do we search in the first place, right? What is this that we're dealing with here? So searching is based off of this language, like this search processing language called SPL. And there's about a little over 140 commands. There's all kinds of crazy stuff when it comes to it. But what's cool is that it is based off of Unix and SQL. And if you're already familiar with stuff like Bash, and you're already doing database stuff with SQL, any of the variants, the concept is it's a combination of the two. So pipelining your commands and doing Boolean-based logic is going to really accelerate learning that SPL, that language, so that you can be an efficient searcher, right? And so some of those commands allow you to do stuff like filter, modify, manipulate, enrich, insert, and delete. And if you're an old school Linux fan like me, we used to call those cut, set, and awk. But you don't have to do all those things. You can actually do it all in line. And so part of that searching process is manipulating and actively working with the data. You can even create new variables. You can do algorithmic manipulation, and you can even do testing, so if statements and cases and things like that. It's very, very deep. And honestly, I don't use all the commands, but there's a lot out there. And if somebody were to ask, what's your favorite command? Transaction. It's pretty cool. Check it out. Maybe at the end I'll tell you. So now that we understand that Splunk is bringing in our logs, it's parsing that data and identifying those fields and allowing us to make those fields pivotable and searchable. We've already gotten the approach on, okay, I am ready to start performing my searches, but how do I really make value here? Like, we invested in this expensive tool, or I'm at home experimenting with it, which, because it's free, you can get up to 500 megs of log data a day, and you can just run this at your house. Just for fun, just to see what's going on in your network. You'd be surprised. Your router makes a lot of logs. And so the big seller here in the business space and the enterprise space is the dashboarding, right? It's visualization of that data. How do I present my data in such a manner that anybody can make sense of it? In fact, I threw up this executive dashboard here. Why? Because executives love dashboards. Percentages, numbers, definitives, right? Is it a yes or is it a no? Is it working or is it not? Am I making money? And this is a great example of just taking data from different departments, right? We have IT operations, we have security, we have application delivery, we have business analytics and IoT. And all of these different systems are actively logging. You bring that data centralized back into Splunk, and then you make sense of it, right? So we can do trends and graphs and analytics. We can determine the state of different things, all based off of the log data that's generated. If we wanted to go down the security road, we absolutely can. Our stuff like firewalls and our VPNs are constantly generating data based off of those connection attempts, where they're coming from in the world. Are people failing? Are people successful? Are we seeing 10 fails in a row and then a successful within a certain small time frame? Is that a brute force? The idea is, if you can collect the data and you understand what it means, you can start to make sense of it. You can make it alertable, actionable, displayable, And then you can build your what we call correlations, right? So in the bottom left, we have what's called notable events. That's a series of conditions that are predefined in a search query so that when that event happens or that event comes up, Splunk creates an alert, creates a notification about it, right? And so SQL injection attack detected. Well, in theory, what does that look like? Well, we would maybe look at our application logs that are web-based or public-facing, and then we would look for particular characters that are often used in SQL injection. So stuff like single quotes, right? Why would that ever need to be in a query? That's user-generated, right? We're talking about the parameters here. And, you know, stuff like join and, you know, things like that. And those are often used in SQL injection. So you can say, hey, Splunk, if these logs from this type of system have these kind of fields in them, let me know, right? Just let me know when we're under attack. And so working with the data is much easier once it's in and once it actually makes sense, right? And by the way, I am watching the Discord, so if there is any questions along the way, please feel free to shout out. I did see RCS mentioned the cool background, so you can also just say hey. Finally here, you know, a lot of people, yes, Splunk, they do security, right? But everybody's going to hate me when I say this. Splunk is not a SIEM out of the box. You can make it a SIEM. But the best part, in my opinion, is the versatility to make it whatever you want. Like it is for your organization. It is a tool that can be used by different teams. Let's take this example, for instance. So IT operations has a web application here. And so we have stuff like Apache and MySQL. That log source can still be used by other people. So let's just take Apache logs as an example. This is for a web application. This web application can be used by security to look for those SQL injections and other types of web-based vulnerabilities. It can be used by IT to monitor application health, response, uptime, 404 errors versus 200 successful. So are there pages missing, and is there experiential and UI issues from the user space? And then finally, it can be used by marketing team to determine which pages are most popular. When people land, where do they click next? There's a lot of different departments and teams within an organization that can use one single log source for multiple different purposes. And just to put it out there, the pricing model for Splunk, I hate to talk about money in business and stuff like that, but once data is in Splunk, there isn't a charge to use it. So if you can figure out how to maximize the data that you already have in Splunk and get the most people using that same data set, like that's free value. That's added value right there, where the data is already in. That's where the billing takes place. The how are you using this data? How many people can you get enriching it and making sense of it for their departments? That's entirely up to you. And that's the kind of things that I love to support. Splunk Tech. Who uses Splunk, right? At the end of the day, we talked about that it comes from your security and your network and your databases, right? It's all these different things. And it really, look, if something generates data or generates logs, Splunk can make sense of it. It can use it. So now that we know that, and we know that it can be used by different members of our organization, let's take a look at some examples here. Sorry, wish I had my water somewhere. So Domino's Pizza, we're just gonna call them out like that, right? More than half of Domino's orders today are digital. We do not call, nobody picks up the phone anymore. I don't understand these millennials. And we have a different world we live in. We are digital, we are operating online, and we expect it to work the first time, right? We're just kind of little, we're privileged like that. So, who's it? It's used by their IT and it's their security, but what they're doing is they're monitoring that experience health, right? Is the app responsive? Is the website responsive? Because if a website doesn't work, you are bound to go somewhere else, right? If you log into a website and there suddenly becomes an error, you don't often continue to just try like, oh, maybe it'll start working. Like, no, if your experience is terrible, you lose business, right? And so it is very important for their stream and flow of successful transactions to constantly work and be very fast. In fact, Domino's, their most important day is the Super Bowl. And if they have an outage on the Super Bowl, that I call is bad business. So Splunk is one of the many ways Domino's does take this stuff very seriously and utilizes it to make a better business. I hope everybody participated in the U.S. Census because it makes the country better. But this year, right, is the first digital decennial, right? So every 20 years, first time they're actually letting you just go online and do this stuff. And the U.S. Census Bureau is making sense of that data. They're breaking down the analysis with all of that rich information. And so now they can start pivoting off of Splunk by state, by county, by all the different statistics and factors that are part of the census. And it's fantastic what you can do with this much data as far as what it really means and how to analyze it quickly. We're not crunching paper and numbers anymore. The computer's doing the work for us. So super interesting how that is happening. Now here's another really cool one. Carnival Cruise Lines. They are using Splunk to look at every single system on the physical cruise ship. And what that means is I'm talking about the HVAC system, so the air conditioning, the navigation system, the water purification, so that when you open that sink or that shower, it's not salt water, right? And they're monitoring the whole cruise ship. So from an IoT perspective, and this data is critical to safety and security of these ships and all of those passengers on board. And another cool thing is they have all these new apps now. And so you can use Splunk to monitor the wireless experience because the program is now in your app, and in your phone, you can see like all the activities for the day. And based off of your location in the ship, they can suggest things that are nearby. And so they're now, yes, from a business perspective, tracking you wherever you go on the ship. But that really does help you from an experience where they can make things flow better so that you're not walking long distances all the time to get to different areas that maybe you want to go to next. So they have a good understanding of that how people interact and float around the ship to build better future experiences for you. And so all of this data, again, can be analyzed, parsed, put together, and tabulated so that you can determine the best route to handle things. Whew. Okay, on to the next. Let's talk a little bit about value of Splunk, right? And I'm not talking about how to throw money at Splunk. I'm talking about how to make Splunk pay for itself. The first one is Splunk Base. This is the de facto app store for Splunk. And you can go onto the website, and this is where you download the apps and modules for Splunk. There's only really, to be honest, at the end of the day, there's a handful, I think about 5 or 6 paid ones, but the rest are free. And this is where you see the partnerships between major vendors and Splunk. So if you run a particular piece of hardware in your environment, type it in the search and download that app that's going to plug into Splunk for that particular log type. That way, when you bring in the logs, Splunk is already familiar with it. This is the trick to making Splunk understand your logs and parse out those individual fields that we talked about. Now, you can go to splunkbase.com, or you can use the Splunk Base built into Splunk. This is actually in a Splunk web interface. And you simply browse for more apps, and it's the same searching functionality, and you can click install with a one-click deal. You're now importing these different parsers and apps, okay, right into your Splunk environment. Now, what's cool about Splunk Base and all these apps and stuff, there are nearly 2,000 apps. And I just checked a little bit earlier before this talks, and yes, there's like 1,970, something like that, apps and add-ons available on Splunk Base today, right? And these different apps are going to help you make Splunk successful. Splunk itself is a data parser, and you have to tell it, I'm getting logs from XYZ vendor. Here's the app that makes it parse those logs. And so these apps are invaluable, in my opinion, to making Splunk do what you were sold on, what you read about, what it's supposed to do in your, in your perspective, in your view. All right. Now, there's some apps that entirely just demonstrate and visualize data. That, there's apps from certain vendors that this is what is capable as far as a visualization and a processing of logs from our source. And then other ones are truly just background parsers. But the key here is that there is a cooperation between the vendors and Splunk to process that data, okay? When you get the app from XYZ vendor, it is prepared, you're now prepared to receive logs from that system, and it will make sense, right? It will break out those fields that you can search off of. One of the next other cool tools that I love is Answers. This is a Q&A forum where it uses an upvote system to provide answers. It's actually kind of gamified. Users can log in and participate and supply answers, and if they're voted the right answer for users' questions, they get points. And actually some cool stuff that happens at the larger National Splunk Conference if you're a big participant in this kind of stuff. And so oftentimes you start out here by searching, is somebody having the same issue that I am? How do I do this? And you might find an answer. I oftentimes, 9 out of 10 times, I'll find exactly what I'm looking for right here in Answers. But you know what? If you do not, that's okay too. You can ask, and the community will respond. So cool stuff there. And then finally, I kind of made a little joke about RFCs and docs earlier, but we'll just do a raise a hand if you've ever read the Microsoft Windows documentation thoroughly. I didn't think so. Splunk docs are actually pretty good. They are very well written. They give you a lot of examples visually, step by step, all kinds of different things like that. And you would be surprised if you just simply pop over to the docs and kind of search for what you're looking for, and there will be provided a command line version of it, a web GUI version of it, and what it does and the different caveats, and then even examples of different parsing codes. And really, I'm absolutely impressed with the documentation of Splunk. And I don't say I like reading the docs of most things, but these are good. Something else that's really cool is this lexicon, or Splunk lexicon. There's so many words that are unique to Splunk, architecture, vernacular, things like that, that understanding what all of these different key components are and defining them is going to help you when you're talking to support, when you're talking to professional services, or even when you're talking to other Splunkers. Using the language of Splunk, that way you can get your message across appropriately. And so what are some of those things defined as, right? Well, we have stuff like a search head, right? That is the definition of the web search console. There's stuff like the indexers. And oftentimes this is comparable to other SIMs, right? Splunk does it one way, but another SIM may do it, similarly. And they just call it a little something different, universal forwarders, right? That's the agent. That can also be called a collector in other environments. A heavy forwarder is a Splunk system dedicated to receiving from other forwarders. So it's like an intermediary point. And then finally, there's stuff like a deployment server. That's a really fancy term for agent management console, But again, learning these particular words and understanding where they play a role within the Splunk environment is going to help you talk to other professionals and get your point across, and so that you're all on the same page. And especially if you're going to do any kind of like education and training, which is free, you want to know what these different key components mean. So today you can go on Splunk.com and take Fundamentals 1. This is a free self-paced training that you can just kind of get, the lay of the land. So it teaches you stuff like navigate in Splunk, right? And use different fields that we talk about how they break out, right? We talk about, you can get statistics from your data. So these are great examples of, okay, now I have my data, how do I start using it? So walk you through some of the capabilities and examples. So like creating reports, dashboards, and alerts. That's the executive win right there. And did I mention it's free? So it's a great starting point, and it's actually the training required to get your first Splunk certification, which is called Splunk User Certified. It's okay. So when I'm often working with a customer and they're telling me, oh, we have about 10 analysts that will be using this Splunk suite, I say all 10 of them need to go and take Fundamentals 1 right now. I don't think they're allowed to log in until they've completed Fundamentals 1, because they're going to have a million questions. How do I do this? How do I do that? Fundamentals 1 is going to cover all of those things. And so this is your opportunity to give free training to your employees and save time. And time is money from asking a million questions that may already be answered in this training material. Now, Fundamentals 2 is the next step. It's going to get a little bit more advanced. Searching and reporting commands, right? We talked about getting into those SPLs and creation of knowledge objects. So knowledge objects are those rich things, those dashboards, like those units. We talked about transforming commands. I mentioned transform was my favorite. Visualizations, right? There's a lot of value in that. And again, filtering, correlating, and data models. The point is this is the next step in it. Now, although not necessarily free to the general public and everybody, Splunk does have a really good program for veterans. And so if you are a veteran, this second set of training is also free. And so I would highly suggest taking advantage of this. If you are in an enterprise that Splunk is already at, why not take the free training? If you are looking to learn more about Splunk, thank you RCS for posting up that link. If you're looking to learn more about it, like these are things that you can put on your LinkedIn, right? This is marketable stuff. It's one thing to say that I've seen Splunk, but it's another thing to say that I've took some training in it and I got a certification in it. And that actually does mean something when you're looking at opportunities as like an analyst. Check it out, all right? So let's talk about some closing remarks. I always got to shill just a little bit here, but in my professional opinion, the key to success is you get data in. So we locate that source and we tag it with the appropriate vendor stuff out of Splunk Base. Then we validate and verify. Is the data correct? And can you perform basic searches on it? Okay, you always trust but verify. Then step 3 is going to be build those dashboards and reports. This is where you prove worth. This is where you make the investment into a piece of software actually pay for itself. Make Splunk yours. And then finally, let's deliver that success to management. Let's get some huge wins here, all right? Let's show them why this tool, or really anything like it, is going to make sense of your data and bring value to your company. Hopefully even protect you too and alert you when bad things are happening. So what the hell do I do at Guidepoint, right? Well, I do professional services. I run an awesome team of talented individuals, and we do all kinds of cool stuff. We help you out remotely. We don't really do on-site right now. Nobody does. But when things come back, we'll go back on site. But projects and staff augmentation, and we focus on, Splunk itself. We also focus on some of those premium modules like Enterprise Security and ITSI, even Splunk Cloud if you're a Splunk Cloud user, and Phantom for automation, right? And so what are those things that I'm dealing with, right? And yes, I have to talk about what I do, but I want people to also be inspired to seek out a profession in Splunk and Splunk Enterprise and Splunk engineering, because it's a lot of fun doing this stuff, right? So I'm doing architecture, I'm doing migrations, installations, upgrades, tuning, and helping other people, take all of this massive amounts of big data and parsing it and processing it and enriching it such that it makes their business better. Right? It is such a cool thing to see the impact that you can have on a corporation. When I walk into an environment, I try to look at it from a health check perspective. So what is going on in your architecture? What do your configurations look like? What do your apps look like? How's your licensing? Are you clustered? So all kinds of different things. And then I present that as, this is where we're at today. This is your baseline. How do we get to that next step? And let's build that road forward so that you are happy with the software, you're happy with the product, and you feel that experience and that value is really, adding to your company. So I wanted to take this opportunity to, as we wrap up here, to take the next 5 minutes before, our next kind of thing here, to see if there's any questions out there. And I wanted to again say, thank you to the BSides Greenville team. I live down in Florida, but I have been to Greenville. It is a wonderful city. And again, I mentioned I have a big background in cybersecurity in BSides and Splunk. So we'd love to hear, but I see a question coming from Discord here. You've been given access to Splunk and you want to watch over your digital flock. Any other recommendations on where to start beyond the Fundamentals 1 and 2 class, especially schema, searching, good books, references, etc. So the big trick is, I think, like anything else, the more you use something, the more you get familiar with it, the more you get the opportunity to learn about the little nuances and quick tricks and tips along the way. So really look at what other people are doing in your field by bringing in some of those apps with example dashboards. When you download a dashboard, for instance, for Palo Alto, it is full of what is capable with Palo Alto data. And so you're not left on your own to try to determine, okay, great, I've got the logs now, but how do I, where do I start? What's the first thing I should be looking for, right? I need some kind of direction here. And so those apps are often going to help you build out some examples of potential directions you can go in. And you may find that those examples are very useful to ultimately building out your ideal dashboard of my security operations center, my command center. There's a ton of great books out there about Splunk commands. And I also do this stuff regularly. So I'm out and about. I do training sessions and webinars. And so, hit me up, say hi, tell me a little bit about what your challenges are, and I'll do my best to point you in the right direction. And by that, I'm not saying like I'm trying to sell you something. I'm literally going to say, check this out, look into these different things. Here's some other resources that are similar to kind of what you're ultimately trying to achieve. I don't see any other questions right now at this time. Resources also, Splunk Answers, and that community built around that. There's even a Slack. Splunk has public Slack, so hop in there too. But track me down online, right? So again, thank you so much. My name is Jonathan Singer with Guidepoint Security. You can find me on LinkedIn and on Twitter. And reach out if you have any other extenuating questions after this.